Okay, good morning, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about components of the environment and the different categorizations into which the environment is usually made. So the simplest ways to split up the environment is to look at an object and ask, is it living or is it non-living? And then there's another one which talks about the geography and states of matter. Is it solid? Is it liquid? Is it gaseous? And so, in that other second method, you divide the earth into different spheres. Anyway, generally speaking, the environment is everything that surrounds us and affects our existence. It includes all living organisms, non-living elements, and the systems they create together. Understanding the environment, of course, helps us to protect nature, manage resources, and build a sustainable, society. If we don't manage our environment, we won't be able to live here for as long as, when I say we, I mean humanity, for as long as we probably want to. And there's a whole lot that goes into the environment, and we really need to understand, you know, how to take care of it. I was, opportune to watch a program recently, and it was about a river. And rivers meander. When you say meander, meander means they curve. They curve, you know, they have fallen trees blocking certain places. And the in this particular program, what happened was that apparently the river had been dredged, so to speak, made into a straight line. So the water was just flowing, and the current was high, uh, but and it wasn't healthy. It was not so clean, and so they tried to, these conservationists now try to restore the river to its natural state. And what they did was that they allowed it to meander again, that is to curve, go up and down. And what that did was that it created areas where the current will be suddenly high, very small areas in the river, places where the current was very high, strong, places where the current was very slow, little pools of water that would gather on the sides. And in every aspect of the river that was slightly different from any other aspect, there were different types of life forms that developed. Of course, these life forms are a part of the biodiversity that we are going to be talking about, later on in the course of this course. And you know, immediately the river began to become healthier. You will find that there were lots of birds who will now come to that same river to pick some of the biodiversity that had developed, some of the worms, some of the small fishes, some of the small, in fact, even the pools of water, those areas that looked as if, oh, that is stagnant water. No, it was actually another breeding ground for some of the, you know, wildlife that began to develop in that place. And of course, as soon as it rains and the water covers everywhere, parts of the place we call a pool of water flows back into the river and all that, making everywhere very healthy. And you would be shocked at how clean the water looked after just about 6 to 8 months, going to a year. They began to see serious, remarkable changes in the quality and health of the river. Anyway, let's go on with our components. So basically, we're going to be looking at living and non-living. We're going to look at whether that categorization that categorizes the environment into biotic and abiotic elements, that is the living and the non-living. And then we're going to look at that type of categorization that categorizes it into different systems, different states of matter, the gaseous state, the solid state, and possibly the liquid state. So yes, the environment components are classified in two major ways. The first divides them into biotic and that's living and abiotic non-living elements. The second uses the Earth system model with four spheres. In that system, we have what we call the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere and the biosphere. Both models help to explain how nature works and are used in environmental science and sustainability planning. Next slide. Okay, so again, yes, the A in abiotic at the beginning means not, that is not living. These are chemical parts of the ecosystem, even though they are not alive. Living things literally cannot live without them. Examples of these non-living things are the sunlight, temperature, water, rocks, wind, air. They are non-living, but they are the ones that determine, they dictate exactly what type of biotic life can exist in a place. You can imagine the desert, for example, very low water, a lot of sun. It determines what type of vegetation, what type of animals, the type of living things that can possibly exist in that environment. So even though it is the non-living aspect of the environment, it determines to a large extent the health and even the ability of the living things to exist. That is why, as human beings, when we say sustainability planning, what we're talking about is that we're trying to ensure that we protect the environment, we treat the environment in such a way that it will allow us to continue to survive on the earth. Okay, so the classification models I was talking about is the biotic, abiotic, living, non-living things, and it is primarily used in ecology and biology. The four spheres, the lithosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere, and biosphere, are usually used in earth science and geography. So what are the basic components of the environment? The biotic components are all the living parts of the environment. They include plants, animals, microorganisms, and humans. Like I said before, your dog, your cat, animals, plants, live, all these are biotic. Even if they've lived before, like a dead tree is still a biotic animal, it has been alive before. And of course, we all know that some of these things appear to be somewhat dead, but if you leave them in a place that is conducive, if the abiotic environment is conducive, we may yet see that it will spring back to life. The biotic components, that's the living components, fall into three categories. We have the producers. These producers are the ones that create food using sunlight. They are plants, algae, and some bacteria. They use the sunlight, the process of photosynthesis, and they form the base, that is the bottom of the food chain. Consumers, we have also the consumers, they eat other organisms for energy. This group includes herbivores, those ones that eat leaves, carnivores that eat mainly flesh, and omnivores. Uh, Human beings, we are also part of those consumers. As you know, we eat the leaves, we eat the meat, we eat almost everything. Then we have the decomposers. This break down dead material. Fungi and bacteria recycle nutrients back into the soil. They complete the nutrient cycle. The biotic components maintain the ecosystem's balance. These are some of the things what they do. They create food chains and food webs. Biodiversity among biotic elements ensures the ecosystem's resilience. More species means stronger, healthier environments. That's what I was talking about when I was describing what was in the river, and this biodiversity, that is getting more of the living things that should naturally be in that environment to be in that environment, is so as to make the river healthier, generally to make the environment healthier. And like I said, the water that was flowing in the river became pure. In fact, you would see that it was cleaner because the different organisms that are supposed to be active in that river flow, that river, were active. And the moment they were active, they were cleaning out and removing all the things that could possibly make that river impure. So more species, that's why the conservationists are very concerned that we are losing a whole lot of our biodiversity, because when an environment that should be of a certain temperature is it becomes too hot or becomes too cold, the natural uh, organisms and life that should be in that environment will either migrate or die or just not be able to produce. Sometimes the mere fact that there is no suitable place for animals to mate will make it impossible for them to, or they couldn't know where the place where they used to lay their eggs has to be a certain temperature, has to be in a certain area, has to be if we lose, if somebody goes and builds a house in that place and they can't find any place to go and mate at that season of the, we will yet find that over time we will gradually lose that species of animal, and that is how biodiversity is generally lost. So okay, let's talk about a little bit about the abiotic components of the environment. These are non-living physical and chemical elements. They provide the foundation for life to exist. Major abiotic components include air. Air supplies oxygen for respiration and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. It regulates temperature and distributes moisture. Of course, we all know how important air is. The moment the air in a room becomes stuffy or the air is not entering a room, you know how very quickly we become very uncomfortable, and it is the same with other living organisms. Water is essential for life processes. It shapes climate, supports aquatic ecosystems, and enables nutrient transport. Of course, I mean that goes without. That doesn't really require much explanation. The soil anchors plants and stores nutrients. It filters water and hosts countless microorganisms. You cannot begin to imagine the number of. I mean, in fact, I'm sure that there are certain microorganisms in the soil on Earth that humankind has not yet discovered. These are all abiotic. And when you look at the whole, when we begin to look at the other way of categorizing the environment, when we look at the state of matter and all those things, you find out that the soil, the abiotic is way more than the abiotic environment. You can imagine the whole earth and the earth's crust, and it's only the surface of it where we living things are managing to what was that? Oh, remember. I'll check it out later. Sorry for that. So some of the other abiotic components of the environment still include sunlight. Of course, it provides energy for photosynthesis. It drives climate patterns and regulates biological cycles. Even the cycle of how we sleep and wake up is somewhat regulated by the sun. I hope I'm right. Temperature determines which species can survive in an area. It affects metabolism, reproduction, and behavior. True. I just said a few things about that, and of course, even as human beings, we know how difficult it is. In fact, if the weather gets cold to a certain extent, people will die of is it hypothermia or so? I think it is. Minerals supply nutrients and for plant growth. They are building blocks for bones, shells, and cellular structures. The climate combines temperature, rainfall, seasonal patterns, and defines the biometric types and ecosystem boundaries. Anyway, that what this means simply is that the climate, just as we explained, combines temperature, rainfall, and seasonal patterns, and this defines the boundaries. If if a certain place you could when we say define boundaries, I think a classical example is when you see a place that has had some rainfall and a place that has not had rainfall for the past 10 years. You will automatically see that the place that has had rainfall will show a lot of green vegetation, while the place that has not had any rainfall will probably be looking brown and sandy and dry. And so that's sort of like the climate, the way the climate is will define and shape the boundaries of the ecosystem. If it will allow a certain ecosystem to develop in a place, it will, it will show. Abiotic factors control species survival and distribution. They determine habitat suitability and ecosystem productivity. That's true. So let's just go through this table. Abiotic factors: sunlight, influence energy for photosynthesis. Example: tropical forests thrive with abundant sunlight. Yes, water supports all life processes. Deserts have limited biodiversity due to water scarcity. So I mean, so it goes without saying. I'm sure if you read through the table, you will find, you'll find it easily understandable based on some of what we discussed in, just a few minutes ago. Okay, so the second type of categorization is the four spheres of the four major spheres of the environment. And we have the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, and atmosphere and so on. Lithosphere comes from the Greek word stone. This is the solid rocky outer shell of the earth. What's in it? The ground you walk on, mountains, rocks, sand, soil, and the earth's crust. Why does it matter? It provides a physical base for plants to grow their roots and for us to build our houses. The hydrosphere, on the other hand, means water. This is all the water on, under, and above the surface of the earth. What's in it? Oceans, rivers, lakes, glaciers, that is frozen water, and even underground water reservoirs. In fact, about 97% of this sphere is salty ocean water. Why is this important? Water is the ultimate life support fluid. No hydrosphere, no life, period. If there is no water, my brother and my sister, there will be no life. Without water, there is no life. So you can have the lithosphere, that is, you can be on earth, be walking around there. If there's no water, we are all gone. If there's no water, we cannot survive. We cannot, I mean, there's no, we cannot survive. So the lithosphere is the Earth's solid outer layer. It includes land, rocks, mountains, and the soil. The lithosphere provides minerals and metals. It is the foundation for terrestrial ecosystems and human settlements. The hydrosphere, like I said just a few seconds ago, contains all the water on Earth. This includes oceans, rivers, lakes, groundwater, ice, and water cycles between these forms continuously. The hydrosphere regulates climate and sustains aquatic life. So now the other two is what we have: the atmosphere. The atmosphere means vapor or breath. This is the blanket of gases that wraps around the entire earth, held in place by gravity. What is in it? The air we breathe, which is mostly nitrogen, 78%, oxygen, 21%, and traces of other gases like carbon dioxide and so on and so forth. Is also where weather happens. Why is it important? It acts like the Earth's personal sunscreen, blocking harmful radiation from the sun while keeping the planet warm enough for us to live. How do they all connect? These two systems overlap all the time. For example, a fish swims in a river, hydrosphere, breathes dissolved oxygen, abiotic, atmosphere, and rests near the riverbed on the lithosphere. The biosphere, where the magic happens, if you look at that blender and mixed lithosphere, land, hydrosphere, water, and atmosphere air together, anywhere they overlap, you get the biosphere. Bio means life. So the biosphere is the global zone where all life exists. And you'll be shocked that the biosphere is a very tiny aspect of the whole, of everything. It cannot exist on its own, but it relies on all the other three spheres to, for water and air. So the biosphere is the zone where life exists. It includes parts of the lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. All organisms live within the biosphere. It is where different spheres interact to support life. Now, I'm just going to talk about this last type of categorization. This one is natural versus man-made components of the environment. Natural versus man-made components of the environment. So this includes all the natural environment now. The natural environment includes all living and non-living things that occur organically, that is, without human intervention. Example, coral reefs, rainforests, wild weather systems, and tectonic plates. These systems run on ecological cycles like the water cycle that have been perfectly balanced for millions of years. On the other hand, we have the man-made environment. This is the surrounding modified or created by humans to fit our needs. Example, cities, roads, farmlands, dams, smartphone or laptop. So while the built environment gives us shelter, energy, and Wi-Fi, it often disrupts the natural environment by creating pollution, destroying destroying natural habitats, and using up resources faster than nature can replace them. That's why we have situations in the Amazon forest and co where we are using wood, cutting the trees, using the wood faster than the trees can grow. Anyway, so the natural components exist without human intervention. That is, they exist organically. They evolved over millions of years through natural processes. They will include forests. They grow naturally and support a diverse species of living things. They regulate climate and produce oxygen. We have rivers formed through geological processes. They shape landscapes and provide water sources, resources. So we have, and like I said, even though some rivers have been tampered with by human beings, and some artificial rivers they've tried to dig, but for you to get a river back to its natural state, people have gone back into historical maps to see how the river formed initially, what the path was. And you know how it is. Human nature, when we want to build our houses, build our farms, and all that, we are the ones who encroach into all these farmlands. And the key aspect of it is that when we encroach, we hardly ever leave those things in their natural state. And it is only in their natural state that they can continue to support the biodiversity that they should, making the earth a healthier place for us to live. And if the earth is healthy, that's the only way it can be sustained. As we all know, when the earth is unhealthy, over time it becomes very difficult for it to support the biodiversity that it should. The climate systems operate through natural cycles. They include monsoons, trade winds, and all that. That's also has the climate system has not been affected by man. It's still natural. Wildlife includes all naturally occurring animal species. They maintain ecological balance. Of course, naturally occurring animal species are the ones that they maintain a balance. The lions will never grow to a point where they will eat all the buffon and all the antelopes and all. There's always a balance. There's always a balance. If you notice that certain animals, when they produce their young, they produce them in hundreds, thousands, because there are bigger fish in the water that will eat them in hundreds and thousands. And but there's a balance created. There's always a balance created in such a way that no, but it's only man for commercial reasons, for whatever reasons that we begin to consume something much more than. Hardly would you find animals in the wild who are fat and sloppy and cannot move. But nowadays you find out we have because if you remember if you look at this slide, let's say wildlife includes all naturally occurring animal species. The reason why it is written in this way is because there are some unnaturally occurring animal species that we have gone to breed one dog with another one with all sorts of mixed breeds that they are no longer naturally occurring on the one hand, and then we feed them in a way that is unhealthy and then they become fat. They of course do not have the space and the capacity to exercise as much as they would in the wild, and so it's impossible to maintain any form of ecological balance that way. But like I said again, it's human activities that bring in pollution, degradation, consumption beyond inordinate consumption and so on. And these are some of the reasons why it is important to study the environment, to study, to have this environmental education, so that we can begin to take decisions and that would favor the environment. We're getting towards the end of the. Okay, so we have the human-made environment. The human-made environment that doesn't require much explanation. We have these are things that are components that are created or modified by people. They serve human needs, but often impact natural systems. That's true. Cities are built environments with build. Cities are built environments with buildings, roads, and infrastructure. They concentrate human population. Infrastructure includes dams, bridges, transport networks, support economic activities, industry. It transforms raw materials into products, it generates employment, but can cause serious pollution. You remember some of us who were old enough when some industrial nations came and dumped some industrial waste somewhere in cocoa or somewhere in Nigeria. I think it was I don't know whether it was in an island or in the water. You know, so many companies just dispose their waste in ways that are not environmentally friendly, and so on and so forth. But all these things are caused by overpopulation, urbanization, pollution, and the like. Agricultural systems modify natural landscapes for food production. They include farms, irrigation networks, and crop fields. Like I said before, sometimes even we look at a place, we see that there's a river, and then we feel that it is very good for our crops. But instead of allowing the river to remain in its natural state, we distort the river, and then the river is no longer healthy. It is unable to support the type of biodiversity it's supposed to be able to support. But we are able to draw water from the river for our plants. These are some of the reasons why we need to study the environment, so that we will ensure that we will find a good way of getting water from the river while still ensuring that the river maintains its health. It shouldn't be at the detriment of the river's health. Anyway, so it's easy to look at this and think, cool, some of these are just some definitions, but studying how the environment interacts is arguably one of the most critical science of our generation. This is why it matters. When humans change the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels in the built environment, it warms up the hydrosphere, melting glaciers, and alters the biosphere, extinguishing species. Studying this helps us to figure out how to stop it. Survival and resources. See, everything that we eat, drink, or wear comes from the environment. Knowing how the lithosphere soil and hydrosphere water works keeps our food supply chain from collapsing. Designing better cities. By studying how the natural environment works, future engineers and architects can design green cities built to be environmentally friendly, like using solar energy and building materials that are covered by plants, so that we don't need to live outside of the environment. We are biotic, right in the middle of it. But you know, so and if we begin to make this type of adjustments, it will be the better for our environment and for us as a human species. So that brings me to the end of this lecture. Thank you very, very much for listening. Hopefully by the next class we would have some better connection. If not, we may have to do this again. But it's always a pleasure. To have a lovely day today. Goodbye.